"You're out of line, George." Those were the words that echoed across the studio as the bright lights flickered. Tension crackled like static in the air, and every camera trained on the Good Morning America stage momentarily stopped capturing smiles and headlines, only raw, unscripted humanity. John Kennedy, the seasoned Louisiana senator known for his Southern charm and razor-edged wit, had been invited for what was supposed to be a straightforward interview. Something about national unity, policy reform, maybe a light joke or two to start the morning off easy. But what unfolded was far from light. It became the moment that divided public opinion, shattered media decorum, and revealed something deeper about the state of American discourse. The clash between Kennedy and George Stephanopoulos wasn't just television, it was the collision of two worldviews, each molded by decades of political warfare, journalistic scrutiny, and personal loss. The segment started innocently enough. The lights dimmed, the theme music faded, and Stephanopoulos leaned forward in his chair, ever composed, notes in hand. "Senator Kennedy, welcome. Let's begin with your recent comments about the education reform bill." John smiled, that lopsided grin that disarmed critics and warmed constituents. "Always a pleasure, George. Let's just say it reads more like a pamphlet from a socialist knitting club than anything resembling legislation." The audience chuckled softly. George smirked. Banter was normal, expected. But, as the minutes ticked on, the conversation turned. Sharp George pressed about the senator's past remarks on race, about perceived insensitivities, about voting rights. Kennedy's drawl hardened, his brow furrowed. "I didn't come here to be accused," he snapped. "You're not interviewing me or prosecuting me." George didn't flinch. "I'm holding you accountable, Senator." "Then maybe hold your own side accountable once in a while," John shot back. "This network's idea of balance is inviting me once a year to be your punching bag." The air turned cold. The producers whispered behind glass. Camera operators held their breath. Guests waiting backstage stared at the monitors in disbelief. And then John stood up. Not storming off, just rising with a kind of deliberate finality. "I've got nothing else to say here." George, calmly but with steel in his voice, replied, "If you walk off this set, Senator, you're not coming back." Kennedy turned to him, paused, and said with unexpected softness, "That's a shame. Because this country used to be a place where people talked, not just shouted across cameras." And with that, he walked off. The cameras cut to commercial, but the fallout had already begun. What followed was a media explosion. Twitter trended with hashtag Kennedy walk-off, hashtag Stephanopoulos clash, and hashtag GMA chaos. Cable news dissected the moment from every angle. Conservatives hailed Kennedy as a truth-teller who stood up to media bias. Progressives saw George as holding a powerful politician to account. But beneath the noise, something quieter stirred. A week after the incident, John Kennedy released a video from a park bench in his hometown of Madisonville, Louisiana. No teleprompters, no stage lights, just him, a cup of coffee, and the chirp of cicadas. "I lost my temper," he began, not proud of that. "But sometimes a moment finds you. Sometimes you don't plan it, you just live it." He paused, eyes scanning the horizon. "My daddy told me once, boy, if you ever walk out of a room, make sure you do it for the right reasons, not just because you're angry, but because you've said what needed saying." I'm still figuring out whether I did that. The video struck a chord. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, raw, honest, a rare thing in public life. For George, the aftermath wasn't easy either. He received both praise and venom. Hate mail mixed with heartfelt letters. Old friends called to check in, producers suggested damage control interviews, but instead, George made a quiet choice. He requested to speak on air. Not an interview, just him, face to camera. "Last week, something happened on this show that I've been thinking about a lot. I've built a career on asking tough questions, that won't change. But maybe I forgot something along the way, that behind every soundbite, behind every title, there's a human being." He paused, the silence unusually heavy for morning television. I don't regret challenging Senator Kennedy, but I do regret how the moment ended. Because we're not just losing civility, we're losing curiosity about each other, about what shaped us, about what we believe beneath the slogans. In a surprising move, John Kennedy called George a few days later. Guess we both said some things. Guess we did, George replied. They didn't apologize outright, they just talked for hours about the South, about journalism, about fear and dignity, about how both of them had buried people they loved during the pandemic, about what it means to serve something bigger than yourself, whether it's a country or the truth. And somewhere between the laughter and long pauses, something shifted. Respect bloomed. Not agreement, but something far more valuable. Weeks later, the two met again. This time, not on a stage. It was a town hall in Baton Rouge, hosted by a local university. No national cameras, no bright lights. Just 400 students, some skeptical, some inspired. They talked policy, sure, but mostly, they talked about listening, about the danger of reducing people to caricatures, about how media and politics often reward conflict over compassion. And the students leaned in, asked questions, shared fears. One young woman stood up and said, "I'm gay and conservative. My dad's a preacher and my mum's a teacher. I don't feel like I belong anywhere. How do I talk to people when everyone's yelling?" George and John looked at each other. John said, "Start by asking them who they love, what breaks their heart, then tell them yours." That became the message. The legacy of that volatile morning on Good Morning America, not the clash, not the walk-off, but what came after. Two men, scarred by decades in the trenches, choosing dialogue over demolition. The story made the rounds again months later when they authored a book, After the Fire. Finding Grace in a Divided America. It didn't top the bestseller list. It didn't set the internet ablaze. But it changed the people who read it. In quiet corners of the country, strangers sat together to discuss it. Book clubs formed across political lines. A pastor in Georgia and a librarian in Vermont organized a letter-writing exchange between red and blue counties. High schools added it to civics curriculum. And slowly, in small but measurable ways, the shouting softened. Because one morning, two men reached their breaking point on national TV and, instead of retreating, they reached for something better. Final words from the book. We don't have to agree to care. We don't have to win to matter, but we do have to show up, listen deeply, and remember that every face across the aisle is someone's whole world. Let that be the story. Not of a clash, but of a choice.